Welcome to the One Question Leadership Podcast. This is Devin Crosby of Lynn University. Leadership is a dynamic occupation that requires vision, excellence, but most importantly, the humility to serve your people on a daily basis. As you lead, make sure to become grounded in something greater than yourself. This will shape your decisions, provide clarity to your team, and cultivate trust. And trust is the foundation of success. Enjoy the podcast.
Greetings, this is Ty Brown and welcome to the One Question Leadership Podcast, where we highlight executive and organizational leadership. Be sure to follow us on Instagram and Twitter at 1Q Leadership. Our guest today is Erin McDermott. Erin is the Director of Athletics at Harvard. Greetings, Erin. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, Ty. Thanks for having me.
Yes, ma'am. I'm excited to have you on. Now, you've been at Harvard since July 2020, so I guess you call it a pandemic hire, right?
It sure is. A pandemic hire and a pandemic job so far. Yeah.
So far, right? Yep. Prior to that, you spent 7 years as Director of Athletics at University of Chicago. You spent time at Princeton and at Columbia. And you started your career as an intern with the National Association of Collegiate Women Athletic Administrators, now known as the Women Leaders in College Sports. So you spent almost 25 years in the industry. So you have a wealth of experience, and I'm excited for this conversation.
Yeah, that's correct. And this is just the ultimate right now. It feels like everything was gearing toward this. So it all worked out. I can't say according to plan, but I couldn't have scripted it better, for sure.
Well, of course, over on Athletic Director we had you on a video talking about transitioning from Division I to take over a Division III athletic school in terms of being an athletic director at a University of Chicago. Of course, now you're back at Division I for athletics at Harvard. So yeah, it's been an adventure to say the least.
For sure, yeah. And I remember talking about on that how I thought going to the University of Chicago, I was hoping not to close any doors, and that if I wanted to get back to Division I would be able to. And I felt like it wouldn't close out the opportunities that, would be the kinds of places that I thought I'd be viable for. And thankfully that worked out. So I guess I made an okay decision going there.
Of course, you take over at Harvard. Harvard's AD had been there for a long time, right? And you take over there in the midst of a pandemic, as we mentioned. And I wonder about the leadership strategy. I guess it's been 6 months, almost 7 months or something now since you've been there. You come in, take over for a guy who's been there for a long time. The culture is well established. A, it's Harvard, and B, he'd been there for a long time. So I wonder about just the leadership strategy over the past 6 months after you took over the job.
Yeah, I think the pandemic has almost had to define the leadership strategy a little bit. I mean, I think it would have been the same regardless. It's just you have to be a bit more intentional about it. So the strategy was I'm coming in, taking over for someone who, as you said, has been there a long time, has done a great job, is certainly, identified with Harvard athletics. And I think in any kind of transition like that, coming in and establishing who you are and not being completely disruptive to that culture and maybe to the place, but at the same time, trying to establish your own connection and rapport and kind of identity. So my strategy coming in was, trying to create as many relationships and build as much trust and credibility as I could from day one. And even harder to do that in this pandemic time, especially because at least at Harvard's campus, we're all still working remotely. I've been working remotely since July 1. I've only been on campus, I want to say 3 times. And it was really to walk around, some facilities, try to check out some activity that we had going on. But I really haven't been able to be in the office, and neither has anyone else. So I came in and was very intentional about scheduling lots of meetings. And yes, Zoom is like our new best friend, but worst friend at the same time. And spent a lot of time with our coaches, with people on staff, with lots of different people on campus, because I knew to move us forward and kind of build on what Bob had developed at Harvard, I would need to also have key relationships on campus with those who could be helpful and allies to us. And lots of times with our alumni and donors who have been invested in Harvard athletics and making sure that, they knew who I was and could start feeling comfortable with me as quickly as possible. Because again, Bob had established such great relationships over his 19 years, and that's who they know. That's that's their go-to. And so I had to make sure they didn't just see my name out there as being the athletic director, but they saw my face and they talked to me and I could become more tangible to them. So the strategy was really trying to create as much personal connection as I could and start establishing that trust and credibility and my own identity. And it just became, it's just more challenging in this time of doing it remotely. And you have to be much more, as I said, intentional. And also, I think you have to be, the energy has to come through. You just have to show who you are in a very high energy kind of way so that, people feel kind of like they know you without knowing you yet.
It's interesting about developing relationships all virtual, right? The nuances of in-person. For example, if you meet with somebody or you go to lunch with somebody, both guards may be down a bit and you get comfortable and you talk about some things that you may not talk about in the office. But if all the meetings or majority of the meetings are virtual, the comfortability there, right? If I'm talking to my new supervisor, or I'm talking to the person I'm working for, the new athletics director, do I ever let my guard down? Like, how do we develop? That's had to be an interesting time for you. Can you give me a little bit about just the method of, it's not another meeting, I just want to get to know you, or tell me how you've done that, I guess.
Yeah, I had to show who I was pretty quickly. And I had to kind of, I guess, overall philosophy of Harvard athletics and culture of Harvard athletics has been this idea of education through athletics, that we are, connected to the academic work that's happening in the classroom through our activities and through our coaches and through sport. And that absolutely is, at the core what I'm in this for and what I believe in. And so I think being able to speak to that so comfortably and passionately made people feel comfortable that, this is kind of in my DNA and that was not going to change, that would be our focus. And then, at the same time, I think I had to be the one to kind of let down my guard. To allow others to let down their guard. So even in our very first Zoom interaction, when I was still in Chicago, I had just been announced as the Harvard athletic director, and this afternoon Zoom had been planned for the department. Basically, like everyone who works in the athletic department had access to be on there, and that was their introduction to me. And I, in that, was asked a question about what was helping me through this whole pandemic time and the way we're all living right now. And I talked about my kind of shopping trip before I felt like I would have to be prepared to basically be home for some period of time. And I went to Costco and, it was like this chaotic scene when everyone was just panicked about paper products and sanitizing everything. And so all of that was gone. But at some point I looked in my cart and I saw what was in there and it just made me laugh. And I shared that what I had was a big old thing of chocolate, a lot of coffee pods, and many bottles of wine. And I thought, okay, I guess this is my idea of quarantine. This is what I'm going to
That's it. Disaster prep, right? That's your disaster prep.
Yeah.
Wine, coffee, and coffee.
Wine, coffee, and chocolate. Funny. Oh, and I had a lot of cheese too. Those are my main food groups apparently. So
disaster prep 101.
Yeah. So that kind of I could see already on the faces. Zoom's hard too because everyone's muted. You don't really hear reactions from people. But I saw right away lots of smiles, and I've heard about that moment from people that I think right away just made them feel like, oh, okay, she's real. Like she's just kind of a normal person. And I think that just helped to break down a little bit of that, like you're saying, that initial guard that people have when you're walking in as, the new person in charge, and others are trying to, make their best impression and all of those things. That's all still true. And again, hard, when you're talking through the screen and you're trying to look at the camera and not at the person so that it looks like you're looking at them. But at the same time, it means you can't see their facial expressions. And so, a lot of things to adapt to with that. But that's how I tried to take the lead in just showing that I'm a human being. And, yes, I'm coming into this and I think we can do great things. And I think, we're going to be competitive and we're going to be aligned with the Harvard mission and all that good stuff. And at the same time, I'm here. Like I'm going to be a presence for you that won't feel incredibly formal all the time.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've talked to other people who have taken over athletic programs, and they, you do your listening tour, you meet with everybody, you take the time to figure out if there are going to be any changes or anything like that. And we talk about establishing culture. I think what you did there on Zoom, that first meeting, let people know you're a real person. You're not coming in as, some dictator type person that wants to just change everything immediately. You mentioned staying focused on, I guess the purpose for most athletic departments is to enhance the academic mission of the university. So they see that. I wonder about, and you mentioned it with Bob Scalise.
Mm-hmm.
He's been there so long, established a culture, but I wonder about evaluating the culture of everything, right? You go on these meetings and how can you tell what nuances may need to be tweaked when everything is virtual? I guess that's probably a question everybody who is in a situation like you are is asking themselves. How can you tell if there are nuances that need to be tweaked when everything is virtual?
Yeah, I will say this was one tool that was really helpful to me and not everyone is going to have access to. But before I came in, Harvard had actually gone through a study with an outside consultant, and there were two aspects that the consultants were tasked with reviewing, and one was culture, and the other was structure. And so I actually that was released just before I was named. The culture part of it was anyway. And so walking in, I had this resource of a study that had been done, a year-long, review of those things. And what I did was on the culture part of it, I did read it before coming in. So that gave me some sense of where things were. And it was very positive, how people were very committed to the place. Really, I took a lot of pride in working at Harvard as an institution and also working for Harvard Athletics, that, there was really this identification with being an entity that was about education through athletics. And that was coaches, that was staff, that was students, everyone kind of was very consistent in talking about that. So I knew that we were really in a great place with it, as far as having, people who really believed in the mission, people who were really committed to the place and really wanted to do the best things that we could for our student athletes. So, that was very reassuring walking in. And with the structure part of that study, I actually held off on reading that because that was giving some recommendations around maybe the alignment of people, reporting lines, what gaps might be in that kind of thing for the department. And what I did was I read that after I had the opportunity to meet with everyone, pretty much whether individually or within a team of people, like in a certain area. And especially after I met with all the head coaches individually and got their feedback so that I could kind of come to my own conclusions about things based on my own experiences, based on the consistencies and trends that I was hearing from people, and then use that report as really, something to confirm or maybe, stuff that was not consistent within that I was hearing. And it turned out it was very consistent, which was helpful. So, that's not something everyone will have, but I'd say, I think, doing your own analysis of that kind. I know now there's even, tools you can, have a survey done. There's companies that are providing that for people for a new athletic director walking in. Our friend Mike Cross with Athlete Viewpoint is one that does that. And I think if I hadn't had that tool with Harvard, I probably would have looked to do something like that, because I think it was really invaluable walking in to have some of that information.
I imagine it is. And I think it's pretty smart the way you went about it. Before you read the whole thing, let me take in and do my own assessment of the people even if it's just an initial assessment, and then let me read what this group put before us. I wonder those type of reports, when a school pays for that type of thing, is it mandatory that you implement everything, or can you look at it and decide, especially when you're new coming in like you, can you look at it and decide what you feel like will work and what won't work? How did that work, that balance of?
No, it definitely was not. I was not obligated to, take all of the recommendations. And I've made that clear because, there was also some trepidation from people on staff. They weren't sure what was in that structure report. They didn't know if it recommended eliminating, positions or making change in a way that people might be concerned about. And so I reassured everyone that, first of all, it was actually, quite positive. And if anything, showed that we probably need more help than less. So there really wasn't recommendation to eliminate. And that anything we did from this point forward would be because I felt it was the best way for us to operate. And it wasn't going to be because the report and the consultants told us to do it. So I think that was also helpful. That Harvard didn't make it mandatory that those recommendations get put in place, but they were more, that's truly what they were recommendations, suggestions, not mandates. So it was, again, just a really good tool and something that now I can use to our advantage to say, hey, this is what I think we need. And this report actually backs me up. And since it was the office that I report into that really funded that study, all the better to be able to use it in that way and give it credibility.
Right. It's a good way to start, right?
Yeah.
Have a study already done,
Yeah,
right?
That's
You
a great
step
way to
in
start.
and do your assessment, and then have a tool that you can use to move forward. I'll ask a couple questions here before we wrap. The first one, I guess, is the student athletes. I mean, have you had interaction with student athletes? Do the coaches, do you get put in front of any student athletes since you've been there, or is that something you'll start in this new, I guess, year? Or talk to me a little bit about that engagement and interaction with student athletes.
Yeah, it's been both virtual and very minimally in person. So, I'm really anxious for that to happen because I do feel really disconnected from the students right now. And I don't like that at all. I'm very used to being able to, have presence with them. And I really get a lot of energy from them. I kind of thrive off of our student athletes and their, kind of their hopes and dreams. And so, not having that around me has been really, really hard to not experience that. So that was another group. When I told the story about starting out when I was still in Chicago, they asked me, are there other groups that you feel are important for you to actually get in front of before you actually, make the transition and the physical move to Boston? And I said, yes, I absolutely need to get in front of student athletes. And so the next meeting that was scheduled was with the Student Athlete Advisory Committee. And the next meeting that was scheduled was with the Captain's Council, because they're two different groups at Harvard. And so, it was important for me that I was in front of those leadership groups, that they, again, saw who I was, heard from me, were able to ask questions. And, since then have had a couple more meetings with those groups, but it's something that through this next spring term, I want to try to do a little more regularly now that things are, a little more calmed down, and my schedule will allow for that more. I was able to get to campus and, observe some of the athletes who were on campus training. We only had first years in the fall on campus. So, our activity was really limited, but I was able to go and at least watch some lacrosse players at practice and saw some softball players, got to talk to them, so very little, but at the same time, just treasured those experiences, and just watching them in action, it made me feel a little bit more like, okay, like something's right in the world.
Yeah, right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. So I asked this final question here. Looking forward, one of the major jobs as an athletics director is to evaluate coaches and the staff in the athletics department. There haven't been many sports. There hadn't been any sports, I guess, at Harvard and the Ivy League. I wonder about evaluation methods that you have to use when there haven't been any sports to evaluate. Of course, sports is just one evaluation point of a coach and of the people who work in athletics. But that is a big one. So talk to me a little bit about that in terms of evaluating coaches.
Yeah, no, I would say, I mean, it's obviously a valid question. And as you're saying, the performance in the season is one element, and probably for us, a little less of that evaluation period than it might be for others. And not to say that it's not important, but our evaluation has really stayed consistent because it's more about being a mentor and a developer of the student athletes that we have, supporting them in any ways that they need, and needing to adapt to those things at this time. So it's really been more based on the normal engagement with recruiting, engagement with alumni, which has had to continue in a very different way, but those things continue on, and their support and adaptation for our student athletes, both those who are on campus and for the many who are off campus, and staying engaged with them and helping them through this. And many have been, really creative with things that they're doing with their teams to kind of make them feel connected. It's not just about the sport, but, many have developed book clubs, and they're having social justice conversations, and they're doing leadership programming around those things. So it's really more those elements, that engagement and support for our students, that we're basing that on this year. We don't have the wins and loss performance, but that's okay, because there's a lot of other things that we can, measure and hold people accountable to. And I've been, I will say that's just one part of being at a place like Harvard, and also coming in as a new athletic director, just the head coach, the quality of the head coaches and who they are and how they take that role of being an educator and a mentor as the primary reason that they coach. It's really amazing to see, and so gratifying to be part of that.
Right. And has been proven for years, because you got people who've been there for years in terms of the head coaches there at Harvard. This has been an excellent conversation, Erin. I really feel like I've learned a lot about, being hired during the pandemic, and the ups and downs of trying to manage establishing and continuing a culture as an athletics director. I really appreciate you joining us here on the One Question Leadership Podcast. My
pleasure, Ty. Thank you so much for having me. And, it's a journey, as you said, so 6 months in, but I'm excited about it and looking forward to, engaging in a more normal way. And I think Crimson will be taken off. So we're excited. Thank you.
That was Erin McDermott. She's the Director of Athletics at Harvard University. And of course, this is Ty Brown with One Question. And keep in mind, the role of a leader is to create and maintain an environment that people want to be a part of. And as always, be better tomorrow than you are today. This episode of the One Question Leadership Podcast is produced by Spades Media Group, solving problems using creative leadership.